Hey guys, this is your host, Richard, with another marvelous video. It's highly unlikely for an X-Men story to not feature Genosha, the mutant haven and mutant Utopia. From the comic events like House of M to live-action movies and animated shows like the OG X-Men, the animated series, and now X-Men 97, Genosha has appeared in nearly every iteration. The island nation belonging to the mutants has had a tumultuous past and has seen several genocidal events, but that doesn't mean it hadn't stood the test of time. In this video, we'll explore the entire history of Genosha in the X-Men universe and understand just what makes the island an X-Men character in its own right. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you! Let's begin! Early history. Throughout most of recorded history, Genosha remained uninhabited. It was only in the 16th century that it was discovered by some Europeans. A few years later, the East India Company from Britain and the Dutch colonists arrived here, but none took control of Genosha. However, Genosha did become a transit point for trade people from Asia and Africa. How so? Well, geographically, Genosha was quite strategic. Resting in the Indian Ocean and off the east coast of Africa, the island nation had Seychelles on its southeast and Madagascar on the southwest. Eventually, the French began taking control of the island, and like all colonies, Genosha also had several contenders. By the 18th century, the French and the English came into conflict, which ended in the English victory. The English ruled for nearly 2 centuries before Genosha became independent in the 60s. The dark reason behind Genosha's post-independence success. After independence, when Genosha was no longer being exploited by the colonists for her wealth, the island nation thrived and became one of the richest countries in the world. However, the success of Genosha came at a cost that only the mutants bore. You see, Genosha was using mutants as slaves, and their powers came in handy. With mutants as a slave workforce, Genosha could do in a few days what the other nations did in a year. In fact, the government tested all its citizens for the X gene, the gene that gave mutants their powers, and those who tested positive for the X gene were stripped of their fundamental rights. So, the discrimination was serious. You could say it was the mutant version of apartheid. Although Genosha became independent, the condition of mutants was exacerbated. Of course, the adults faced hardships, but the real victims of the Genoshan laws were the mutant children. Genosha tested children for the mutant gene, and those who had it were turned into what they called mutates. These transformed mutates didn't have any free will because their memories were erased and their personalities were changed. Naturally, this made the mutates the perfect form of slave labor that a draconian government would want. In fact, they even developed methods and technology to transform the powers of mutants into those powers that were desired by the state. Now, the architects of these horrifically cruel experiments were Sugarman and the Genoshan Prime Minister David Moreau, aka the Gene Engineer. Who are these two? Well, Sugarman is also a mutant who came from the alternate future reality called the Age of Apocalypse, which is also one of the best events in all of Marvel Comics. Anyway, Sugarman was a pretty important person in the Age of Apocalypse, where he experimented on thousands of subjects. Holding no qualms for cruelty and torture, he arrived on Earth 616, the main Marvel universe, where he met with David Moreau, a man who was a hardcore Genoshan patriot who wanted to take Genosha to the peak. Sugarman gave David a piece of tech that was once used by the Infinites, the Army of Apocalypse. With this tech, David Moreau started his experiments and now went by the name Gene Engineer. He pretty much fixed the so-called mutant problem in Genosha and ensured its economic and military success. But, like all good things, all bad things must come to an end. The first scuffle between mutants and magistrates. I spoke about the scientists who made the lives of mutants a living hell, but what about the governance? Well, the cops of Genosha were called magistrates, evil people who could go as far as they liked where Genosha's success was concerned. Although a parliamentary democracy with a prime minister and all that, there was nothing democratic about Genosha as mutant oppression was prevalent. Naturally, this also caught the eyes of other mutants who were outside Genosha. One thing led to another, and the Genoshan magistrates kidnapped Rogue and the Goblin Queen, aka Madeline Pryor, who was also the mother to Cable, Cyclops' son. However, the rest of the X-Men came to the rescue and the kidnapped mutants were freed, along with others like Wolfsbane, Richter, Meltdown, and Storm. All of these mutants had been brainwashed into serving Genosha without question. Naturally, the brainwashing was done away with, which also stopped the Genoshan government. In fact, a former ally of the superhero team X-Factor returned into a mutant hater. This guy, Cameron Hodge, was killed by Havoc. Prior to this, Havoc's memories had been erased by the Siege Perilous, a mystical gateway, which, when passed, gives the traveler an opportunity at a new life trajectory. You could say it works similar to a rebirth. Once, Psylocke, Dazzler, Colossus, and Havoc used the Siege Perilous, after which Havoc became a Genoshan magistrate. Others met different fates. For instance, Dazzler became a movie star and Colossus became an artist. But I digress. So, Havoc's spell was broken by his brother Cyclops, who reminded him who he was. After the skirmish, a new government was put in place, a government that promised to do away with the atrocities and better treatment of all mutants. But there still existed a rogue group that didn't wish to forgive the members of the previous regime for the evil things they had done to the mutants. This rogue group also included the acolytes of Magneto, but the resistance was quelled by the X-Factor members who brought peace and stability to Genosha once again. The curious case of Fabian Cortez. So, there was this mutant called Fabian Cortez. Although he was born into a rich family, he soon got bored of the monotony and joined a team of mutants called the Upstarts, who had been assembled by the Games Master. The whole point of the Upstarts was to win points by causing the deaths of people. Fabian ensured the death of several acolytes as well as Magneto, but when the Games Master learned that Magneto was still alive, he stripped Fabian of his points. Frustrated, he initiated his complex plan of getting the points back by causing a civil war on Genosha. Here, he used his charisma to rouse the sentiments of the mutants from Genosha, and as a result, they started killing the humans who had ruled over and oppressed the mutants for so long. In fact, even the humans from the existing Genoshan government were brutally murdered by the brainwashed crowd. Eventually, a civil war broke out between the two opposing sides, namely the mutates and the magistrates. Cortez was apparently killed, but he ensured that the damage was done, and he succeeded in his plans as Genosha was at war with itself. This was the time when Magneto also demanded a separate piece of land where he and all the mutants could live as a nation. The United Nations agreed to Magneto's demands, and Genosha was given to him to build his mutant haven. He and his acolytes came to Genosha and brought a degree of peace and prosperity, but it soon waned into nothingness as the existing magistrates didn't wish to give up their power and authority. So Magneto came into a conflict with the magistrates and another civil war broke out. However, Magneto defeated his foes and managed to restore order in most of Genosha. Xavier and Magneto. Now, although Magneto brought some amount of peace, enough damage had been done and Genosha needed to be rebuilt. This is when Professor X came to the rescue. He and Magneto joined hands and assembled a team of mutants, old and new, to rebuild the island nation. At this point, even a few former magistrates joined the duo in their effort to bring Genosha to its former glory, but few, like Eunice the Untouchable, still remained out of the fray. During House of M, after the Scarlet Witch had a nervous breakdown, Magneto took her from a battle with the Avengers and brought her to Genosha in the hopes of fixing her broken mind. Magneto blamed himself for Wanda's state. He believed he'd pushed his children too far. Magneto asked Xavier to help restore her sanity, but despite doing his best, Xavier couldn't fix her. In fact, Professor X was worried about the danger Wanda posed to reality, so he consulted with the Avengers and the X-Men about what to do with Magneto's daughter. But before they could decide, reality changed around them. Before they know it, they find themselves in a new world, a world that was ruled by the House of Magnus, also known as the House of M. Wanda eventually restored normal reality, but not without major consequences. When she said, "No more mutants," millions lost their powers or died, and only a few hundred mutants were left alive and with their abilities. Magneto was among those who lost their powers and remained stuck on the island, and along with him were innumerable allies and enemies, all of whom had been depowered. Needless to say, many mutants were trying their best to find ways to restore their powers. Chief among them was Quicksilver, Magneto's son and Wanda's twin. He stole the Terrigen crystals, which belonged to the Inhumans. Now, this created more issues, because a warlike scenario broke out between the Inhumans, the repowered mutants, who had the Terrigen crystals to thank, and the third front in the battle was formed by the US Office of National Emergency. In the end, the skirmish ended when the repowered mutants surrendered to the US Office of National Emergency, who also took possession of the Terrigen crystals. Mutant energies. Energy can't be created or destroyed, and that was true for the powers lost by the mutants. These energies eventually found their way to an energy-absorbing mutant named Michael Pointer. No one suspected what Michael could do, but suddenly he was a big shot in the mutant world. Calling himself the Collective, he battled the Avengers and made his way to Genosha, where he sought an audience with Magneto. Controlled by Zorn, the Collective tried to give Magneto his powers back, and also persuaded him to lead the remaining mutants in taking over the world. Surprisingly, Magneto resisted. He let the Avengers extract the energy from him and send it into the sun. Magneto, now unconscious, was taken by S.H.I.E.L.D., but the helicopter transporting him exploded after takeoff. Magneto survived, but stayed powerless until the High Evolutionaries experiment restored his magnetic abilities. During this time, Beast and Dark Beast visited Genosha to study the mutant corpses in the hopes of finding a cure for M-Day. Wiccan and Speed also went to Genosha to search for their mother, the Scarlet Witch. They scoured the ruins but found no trace of her and were forced to leave empty-handed. Necrosha. Selene. a 17,000-year-old mutant traveled to Genosha with her followers, who she brought back to life using the Technarch transmode virus. In fact, she declared Genosha her new Rome. Using the techno-organic virus, she raised everyone killed by Cassandra Nova's Sentinels. So, mutant zombies are what we're talking about. So, not only did Genosha see like 2 genocidal events, but it also experienced being transformed into a city of the undead, or a necropolis, if you will. Selene then absorbed the life force of all these mutants, powered or not, and thereby became a godlike being. Eventually, X-Force killed her, and her inner circle fell apart. Elixir left the team but struggled with shifting out of his black form. He stayed on Genosha and chose to heal and bury the corpses left behind by Selene and her followers. Later, students from the Jean Grey School for Gifted Youngsters, led by Beast and Kitty Pryde, visited Genosha. Rebirth? Well, sorta. Genosha has seen a lot of suffering, and the scars from its genocide and the decimation have never really healed. But recently, efforts have been made to set things right. At the first Hellfire Gala, after mutants formed a new nation on the living island Krakoa, the Scarlet Witch made a dramatic move to secure her place in the island's mutant society and its resurrection protocols. She did this by killing herself. When Wanda was resurrected by the Five, she was able to cast a powerful ritual that created a pocket dimension called the Waiting Room. This realm was a space between life and death, which basically allowed Cerebro to scan across all time and space to resurrect mutants not already in its archives. Suddenly, millions of mutants, including those killed in the Genoshan genocide and the decimation, were queued for resurrection, waiting in their own Elysian field. In the Krakoan Age, Genosha also became the seed for the ancient mutant civilization known as Threshold. Using genetic material from the Genoshan dead, Kitty Pryde and the Marauders sent a lockbox filled with biological data back 2 billion years. This set the stage for the birth of the first mutant society, creating a time paradox where Genosha's fall sparked the earliest forms of mutant life. Genosha in X-Men 97. Building on the classic X-Men the animated series, X-Men 97 has brought back the magic that made the X-Men so beloved. The first episodes did a great job of pulling in both old and new fans, dropping them back into the struggles of a team hated and feared by the world they protect. The show has taken classic X-Men stories and spun them into new adventures, with one recent episode taking things to a shocking place. The episode Remember It took fans back to Genosha, the island that once enslaved mutants. Now a mutant nation, the episode showed Genosha taking its first steps toward international recognition. But quite shockingly, the show revealed the island's destruction by a Mega Sentinel. In episode 5 of X-Men 97, Rogue and Gambit join Magneto on a visit to Genosha as goodwill ambassadors. When they arrive, they're surprised to see how much Genosha has changed. It's now a modern mutant haven and more of a utopia for mutants. They're surprised to see the island nation bustling with activity and good spirits. They meet Madeline Pryor, who's now a part of Genosha's interim council, and it's not before long that Magneto is called to meet with the council. Meanwhile, the Western power couple tour the city along with Nightcrawler. Despite the happy vibe among the mutants, Gambit questions the reality of this paradise, and he's especially concerned about the economy and how expensive things are, as a single apple costs about $10. Magneto's asked by the interim council to rule Genosha. The council includes mutants like former villains Sebastian Shaw and Emma Frost, as well as Moira McTaggart. Magneto agrees, but only if Rogue can rule by his side. Rogue isn't thrilled with the idea and tells Gambit about her past with Magneto. He was her mentor, and since he was the only person she could physically touch, their relationship became much more. Gambit can't handle this and tells Rogue to go be with Magneto. At a celebration gala that night, Magneto and Rogue dance together while Gambit watches. Despite their past, Rogue turns Magneto down. Just when it seems like the personal drama might be resolved, something unexpected happens. At the gala, Madeline Pryor suddenly gets hit with a powerful telepathic blast, which almost knocks her out and causes her nose to bleed. She runs outside and meets Cable, who warns her that everyone needs to leave immediately. She's stunned to realize that Cable is actually her son, Nathan Summers. Cable talks like he's seen this all before, but before he can save anyone, he gets pulled out of time. Then, the devastating attack on Genosha begins. A massive sentinel starts destroying the city, killing every mutant in its path. Gambit, Magneto, and Rogue team up to fight the threat and save as many people as they can. The third act of Episode 5 is packed with action, some of the best seen in any Marvel project. The stakes are real, and it feels like even fan-favorite characters might not survive, and some don't. During the fight, Magneto sacrifices himself. He uses an electromagnetic shield to hold off a Sentinel's beam and keeps Rogue safe by holding her back with metal scraps. In his final moments, Magneto tells Leech not to be afraid before his shield fails and is killed. Rogue, enraged, nearly gets herself killed too, but Gambit saves her by knocking her away with a kinetically charged motorcycle. Gambit then leaps toward the Sentinel with his staff, but is impaled by the massive enemy. In his last moments, Gambit charges the Sentinel with kinetic energy and utters his final words, giving the episode its title, Remember It. Genosha in live action. In the X-Men movie, Genosha is a small, nearly undetectable island located just off the eastern coast. From the outside, it seemed nondescript, but inside, Magneto had heavily fortified it. The island was reinforced with steel girders, titanium furnishings, and metallic walkways that Magneto could manipulate. The base was well equipped, with a boat dock, an interrogation room, a mechanical workshop, lodging, a helipad, and holding cells for prisoners like Senator Kelly. Additionally, Magneto had a private sanctuary where he birthed his grand plans, with walls lined with televisions to monitor news broadcasts. In X-Men: The Last Stand, Magneto returned to the island with Mystique and Pyro after the events at Alkali Lake. Mystique was soon captured on a mission, and Magneto stayed on the island trying to find her and eventually learned about the mutant cure. Pyro found Mystique in a prison convoy, and they rescued her. Magneto then recruited the Omegas, Juggernaut, and Multiple Man to his new brotherhood. Callisto later informed him about Jean Grey's location, which led the team to establish a new base in the forest. In the revised timeline of X-Men: Dark Phoenix, Magneto established Genosha in 1992 as a sanctuary for mutants, a place where they could live in peace away from human persecution. Jean Grey eventually came to the island and sought Eric's help, who ruled the place along with Selene and Ariki. So, that was all about Genosha, the mutant haven that's seen a lot of drama, bloodshed, and action. Genosha has been the victim of multiple genocides, but it's more or less emerged from it all. Much like the mutants the island nation houses, it's resilient and stands tall against the tides of time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks everyone.